Alright, principle number one, no surprise here, is control the center of the board. Usually the player who controls the center of the board has a better chance to win the game than somebody who is making a lot of moves on the side of the board. Principle number two is develop your pieces quickly. Developing your pieces just means moving your knights and bishops off of the back rank. So knight here, and then getting your bishops out. In this position, white is going to have much better chances to win the game because he has developed his pieces, while black has not and just made a bunch of pawn moves. Principle number three, knights before bishops. Usually when developing, you want to develop your knights first and then follow it up with your bishops. Principle number four, don't move the same piece twice in the opening. If you're moving the same piece multiple times in the opening, it means you're not developing your other pieces and you're going to fall behind in development and probably get into a worse position. Principle number five is don't bring out your queen too early. Although the queen is a powerful piece, if you bring it out too early, it just ends up getting harassed by your opponent's pieces and you waste a lot of time. As an example, if I play e4, d6, and I bring my queen out immediately, after knight f6, I have to move my queen. Maybe I'll move it over to a5. After knight c6, I have to move my queen again, and all of a sudden I'm falling behind in development. So don't bring out your queen too early. Principle number six is castle before move 10. If you look at this example, it's possible to castle in as little as 4 moves, and usually after you castle, your king is safe behind a wall of pawns, better than being in the center of the board. Principle number 7 is connect your rooks. So after you've developed your pieces and you've castled, you can simply move your queen up, and now your rooks are connected. This is beneficial because your rooks protect each other, they can help each other, and they also have easy access to go to whatever file you need them to, which is going to be most beneficial for you. Principle number 8 is that rooks should go on open or half open files. In the position on the board right now, the e file is an open file because there are no pawns on it. So a move like rook to e1 would make a lot of sense because it's putting my rook on the open file. A half open file is a file that only has one color pawn on it. So for example, the d file is a half open file because it only has a black pawn and no white pawn. So this would also be a smart move because I'm putting this rook on a half open file. Black's rook on f8 is already on a half open file because there's only one color pawn on it. Principle number 9, knights on the rim are grim. You can see in this position how black's knight is very effective, covering a lot of important squares in the center, and my knight on the side is not doing as much. It only covers a few squares. So keeping your knights towards the center of the board is better than putting them on the side. Principle number 10, try to avoid doubled pawns. In this position, if black captures my knight and I recapture with this pawn, I've created a set of doubled pawns. Doubled pawns are when one pawn is on the same file as another pawn. This is usually a disadvantage because this guy's blocked by this guy so he can't move, and also they can't help each other and defend each other if they needed to. It's very easy for me to move this pawn up and it's defended by this one, or to move this one up and it's defended by this one. You can't do that with doubled pawns. So usually you want to try to avoid those. Principle number 11 is try to avoid isolated pawns. Isolated pawns are pawns that have no pawns on the adjacent files. So this A pawn is an isolated pawn because there's no pawns of the same color on the file right next to it. And these doubled pawns on C2 and C3 happen to be double isolated pawns because again there are no white pawns on either side of them. So isolated pawns and double isolated pawns are particularly weak and they can't help each other like connected pawns can. Principle number 12, try to avoid backward pawns. In this position, if black plays pawn to c4, he's created a backward pawn on d5. A backward pawn means that all of the pawns on the adjacent files have been pushed in front of that pawn and can therefore no longer help protect it. When this pawn was back here on c6, it was protecting it so that it wasn't a backward pawn. Because of the way it's been pushed forward, now this is a backward pawn, and it's a very easy target for white to pile up on because it can't be defended by another pawn. Principle number 13 is don't trade a bishop for a knight without a good reason. So even though they are both worth 3 points, generally speaking, bishops tend to be slightly better than knights. So I see a lot of players will bring bishops out, trade them off for a knight, and it usually isn't worth it. Now in this case you do create doubled pawns, but you also give black a half open file and you lose the bishop. So generally speaking, you don't want to make that trade unless you have a little bit better of a reason to do it. Principle number 14, avoid moving pawns in front of your castled king. So in this position, we've already castled on the king side. It would be a mistake to play a move like g3 because now I've created these weaknesses because the pawn no longer controls those squares. You can see how easily black can come in and infiltrate it and put a lot of pressure on your king. So don't move pawns in front of your castled king. Principle 15 is don't open the center if your king is still in the center. In this position, black could consider playing d5, but it wouldn't be a good idea because after white trades, he's started to open up the center and his king could come under pressure from white's rook because he hasn't castled yet. So it would be better for black to castle first and then consider a move like d5, which is going to start trading and opening up the center of the board. Principle number 16 is that two minor pieces are generally better than a rook and a pawn. Minor pieces are knights and bishops. Obviously, these are the rooks. So in this position, if I were to capture with my knight, black captures, I capture, he captures, I just lost a knight and a bishop, which is 6 points. I gained a rook and a pawn, which is also 6 points, but it puts me at a disadvantage because the knight and the bishop are better than the rook and the pawn, generally speaking. So don't make a trade like that unless you have a very specific reason to do so.